Great to see some familiar names joining us today. Very well, welcome back to you. For those that don't know me, my name's Alex Whittles. I'm the founder and CEO of Purple Frog Data Analytics. I founded 20 years ago, focusing on helping companies develop, implement, and manage and support Microsoft data analytics solutions, warehouses, lakehouses, machine learning, Power BI, etc. And then 8 years ago, I set up Power BI Sentinel, which is software as a service to help manage governance, compliance, auditing, disaster recovery, FinOps, etc. over your Power BI and Fabric estates. I've been a Microsoft Data Platform MVP for 11 years now. So this is a Power BI Sentinel session. It is not going to be a sales pitch, though. It's not going to be a walkthrough of what the product does. It's more about providing a framework of things to think about and questions to ask after this session about your governance needs, approach, and maturity. Now, everything we do cover today is taken care of by Power BI Sentinel. You've basically got two choices. You either buy a solution or build a solution. If you want to build a solution, this session should give you some kind of a structure and a framework of things to think about. If you want to buy a solution, we'd love to talk to you and see how we can help you out. Right, so let's set the scene. It's 8:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning and the board are meeting. CFO questions why the Q4 revenue numbers being presented differ from their numbers by 3%. Someone then asks Copilot and gets a different answer again. No one in the room knows why we get all these different answers or even which number is actually correct. And so all eyes turn to you, being responsible for the reporting platform. The following day, you finally discover that a well-intentioned junior analyst made a change to a reporting KPI. They didn't know the board used this report. They didn't know the KPI existed in other reports. They didn't know the person who asked for the change didn't have authority to request it. There's no documentation, no change log, no rollback, and the analyst shouldn't even have permission to make a change to this production report. And you're being asked for evidence of your governance controls around this. Now, in this scenario, there's no data breach, there's no ransomware, there's no malicious intent, something far more common, and that's success. Power BI has grown into a business-critical data platform, but it's being governed and managed like a reporting tool. It's used by 95% of the Fortune 500 and is mission-critical for the majority of those. Yet governance, auditing, disaster recovery, cost controls have not kept pace with that position in the market. So I want to talk about how we fix that, not by slowing down adoption, but by engineering trust into the platform itself to facilitate even faster adoption. So if we look at some stats, Gartner put out a stat a couple of years ago now to say the poor data quality costs organizations on average $12.9 million a year. When we then look at moving forwards to AI, Forbes say that 85% of AI projects fail due to poor data quality or the right data not being available. Now, this stat varies between 70 and 95%, depending on the research you read. But what is common amongst all of them is it's a staggeringly high percentage. And both of these are down to wasted resources, lost opportunities, and inefficiencies. And building AI on poor and untrusted and ungoverned data. And that's like building a house on a swamp. You go in with great intentions, but it's not going to give you the outcome that you want. It's vital to have trust and transparency in your data and analytics platform to maximize your chance of success. The good news is this is not an insurmountable problem. There are tools, techniques, and approaches we can use to make this relatively easy, and there's even opportunities to use AI tools to help with this. So let's start by looking at what an enterprise risk surface looks like in Power BI and Fabric. And throughout this talk, when I refer to Power BI, I mean Power BI and Fabric, and if I refer to Fabric, I mean both. They are two of the same kind of environments to manage and monitor. So we can kind of categorize these into four pillars: compliance, operational, trust, and financial. From the compliance side, we all have to, I would say, tick the boxes of SOC 2, ISO 27001, and GDPR, but it's more than box ticking. It's actually using these. If we understand our compliance obligations, how we can best use them as a positive to minimize our risk exposure. These compliance obligations exist for a reason. We're ISO 27001 certified, and actually it has going through the process of certification has provided a much richer framework and structure that's really enhanced our own compliance over the last 5 years. And so aligning our Power BI and Fabric to those compliance obligations actually is a very good framework and structure for us. Operational risk, day-to-day things going wrong, people deleting semantic models and reports, misconfiguring security, things going wrong, disaster recovery, what's our recovery point, enhancing the day-to-day robustness of our analytics infrastructure. Probably the most important of these four, I would say, is trust. Inconsistent data sources, where you've got multiple reports pulling data from different sources. The scenario we went through at the start, where the sales figures for Q4 are different in every report. Inconsistent data sources causes this. Does your data come from an ERP or someone's spreadsheet, etc.? Inconsistent calculations, where you've got different versions of margin or year-on-year growth calculations, etc. And no transparency to this. These inconsistencies erode trust and confidence in your estate. And this is important because if users don't trust the reporting and AI output, they'll go rogue. They'll go back to their ungoverned tools, public AI systems, Excel hell, things that we've tried for years to get them off. And we can only keep them off that if they have trust in that estate. And then finally, financial risk. Pretty much every customer we speak to is over licensed on pro licenses, PPU licenses, unused fabric capacity, but also duplicate workloads of we're doing too much. We're doing the same thing multiple times, either identical semantic models in different workspaces or overlapping where there's like 90% similarity. They could be consolidated. You're paying for resources there, not only resources in terms of premium capacity to run them, but also dev resource. You're paying for developers to develop them, to maintain them, to support them, and to look at them. And if you can repurpose that wasted expenditure into the development of new reporting and AI capabilities, you can dramatically enhance the progress of your reporting infrastructure. And so all of these four are covered under effective governance. And as we all know, you can achieve perfect governance and security by just turning everything off, by blocking access to everyone, right? It's an easy way of just stopping it. If they can't see it, they can't do anything wrong with it. But this is the single biggest obstacle that we see time and time again. And this view of governance is fundamentally flawed. We need to repurpose our mindset about governance away from governance being restricting staff and about empowering staff. If you can have effective controls, auditing, trust in your platform, you can let people loose with it. Safe in the knowledge that the right data is being made available, only the right people have access to it, their activities being monitored, you know where data is coming from and where it's going. This is actually a slide from a Gartner conference a couple of years ago. In fact, this talk is actually what I did at the Gartner Data Analytics conference in Orlando and London this year. And this is a Gartner quote where it's about data governance as a key enabler of strategic business outcomes. It's about enablement, adoption, and trust. And so you rephrasing governance as a force for positive that can actually help accelerate our reporting analytics environment is just a healthier way of actually enabling that data-driven culture within our organization. And obviously, as we move forward more and more with AI, this becomes even more critical. The problem we have in Power BI and Fabric, again, this is another Gartner slide from the last time Power BI was in the Bake Off at Gartner. Despite all of its strong strengths and capability, there's a critical lack of capability in the governance aspect of it. And this is why I'm doing this session, because the people kind of bury their head in the sand and think it's fine, Microsoft have got it covered. Well, they haven't. It does not have suitable capability for governance inside the tool. So if you're in charge of your reporting environment, you are responsible for overcoming this. So let's look to see, if we look at those pillars we looked at earlier, I said the most important of those to me is about trust. Trust is the one that's going to cause the biggest undermining of your estate. So we haven't got time to go over all of those in detail in this session. It's only a half-hour session. So let's focus on trust and look at that in more detail. And look at how we can subdivide that into these 5 core areas. What does a trust framework in Power BI and Fabric look like? And we can define this into 5 core areas of consistency, transparency, security, resilience, and FinOps, financial stewardship. And for each of these, you're going to need an approach, you're going to need a plan, processes, and tools to kind of help manage different aspects of this. So we'll look at each of these in a bit more detail and highlight a few key starting points that you can use to get you going on day one. So consistency, data lineage. It is absolutely vital to know where your data is coming from and going to. If you've got 3 workspaces, great, you can use the built-in Power BI and Fabric data lineage view from a workspace to see the data lineage. And it's a really, really nice view, but it's only one workspace at a time. It doesn't cover the whole estate. And we really need to know this particular ERP database, that Oracle, that SAP HANA, etc., where is that data going? And these reports, are they pulling from a consistent source? Are they going from the source or from the warehouse or a spreadsheet, for example? That really underpins, can you trust the data being used for your reports? Where your reports are being built all centrally, this is a bit easier to manage proactively. But when you've got self-service and departmental users creating reports, there needs to be an effective way of monitoring that so you can identify problems and fix them. Then we have a challenge of calculations. How many definitions of profit margin or customer churn or year-on-year growth do you have in your organization? I'm guessing a lot because everyone does. Same as Excel. Every Excel spreadsheet's different. Trying to find a way of actually monitoring consistency in calculations is really critical. And then we have duplicate reports. If we have 10 different reports that all show month-to-date sales, well, do we need all those reports, or can we consolidate those? Or can we consolidate the report into a single semantic model and then share that data across all the different reports and the different workspaces that need it? So again, even though you've got duplicate reports, you've got a consistent semantic model. So again, this comes back to the lineage going through Power BI and back into Fabric of how can you remove the different pipelines that actually contribute to inconsistent results and calculations. This then obviously has a critical impact on your AI, because if you ask Copilot, what's my year-on-year sales growth, which KPI, which semantic model does it go to? Now we can look at building ontologies on top of our Power BI estate to help with that a bit, but it starts with getting consistency inside your Power BI estate first. The next one we'll look at is going to be transparency. It's all very well managing the lineage and calculations and making them consistent, but actually if we're going to build trust with our end users, if your CFO is looking at a report, they should be able to find out what the lineage and calculations are. They should be able to find out, can I trust this data? And transparency is about not only where does the data come from, can I trust it, but also is it up to date? Can I trust the accuracy of it? Or am I looking at data that's 3 weeks old? And if I'm making a business decision, that's going to be flawed. But also then I'm looking at a calculation. Is this the right calculation? How does it work? Now, I don't know about you, but most business users, when they look at a big DAX calculation, don't understand what it does and they don't want to understand. And this is where documentation comes in. And unfortunately, documentation is it's not even a challenge in businesses being slow and expensive. Businesses just don't do documentation over Power BI. The reason being that if you've even got a moderate estate of 1,000 reports, that's going to take 2 full-time Power BI developers 3 years to go through and document at a cost of over $500,000. No one's got the resources or budget for that. But this is actually where we can start using AI to help with our governance tools. This is one of the only screenshots I'm going to show you of, or screenshots of Power BI Sentinel output, where we're actually now using AI to take the DAX, the Power Query, the contextualized code in the system, and then passing it through an AI LLM to generate business user readable descriptions of what that functionality is, what the summary is, the business purpose of that calculation, but also breaking down the functionality for developers. So if you've got multiple developers writing the same reports, or one person developing, one person supporting, they can get a much clearer idea on how that logic works and how it can be optimized and enhanced. Now, we've built this in AI. Again, you can build that in AI if you've got the capability and the data. The key is to turn the lineage and calculations and logic into a language that your business users are going to understand. So they can then start playing a proactive part in enhancing your reporting environment, not just complaining about it. They can feed back to you and say, I don't think this is quite right. Let's amend that, for example. Get a more collaborative approach in your organization. Now, this is an example of using AI not to transform an organization or generate executive insight, but to reduce operational friction, to provide fast, tangible benefits and cost savings within 24 hours and align that to ISO and SOC 2, which both require documentation. Rather than taking 3 years to do development, you can do it in a day. Real, actual tangible benefit of AI to show as a showcase in the organization. Let's have a look at security. One of the biggest challenges we see time and time again is people granting permissions on workspaces and resources to individual people. Do yourself one favor, and that is move to role-based access control. Use entra groups. Try and avoid at all costs individual permissions to people. Why? It's very easy to do that, but actually it's very difficult to maintain. Who do you want to be responsible for managing permissions when a user moves from the sales team to the marketing team? You don't want your Power BI team having to spend weeks trying to figure out which reports they need access to. If they're in entra groups and they move out of the marketing AD group and into the sales AD group, their reporting will just automatically update based on their role in the business. So once you get it set up, it's self-managing and it moves the admin burden to your IT team rather than your Power BI team. It also means you haven't got to worry about individual people. You don't need to know whether individual people should have access to something. You're given access to a group, that's your role done. Then we've got configuration. Turn off functionality that is not approved or needed. Key ones, things like external data sharing. Do your users have the ability to share either a semantic model or a report to someone outside of your tenant? There's a huge risk in doing that. In some cases, it's necessary, but in most cases, it's not. Things like preview features, do you trust that they should be used? Turning on fabric functionality, things like this. What is the configuration of your tenant itself, and how do you lock that down to prevent people from turning things on and doing things they shouldn't be? Now, it's no good just configuring that. You need to monitor it because people go in there and make changes. Microsoft create new functionality, move settings around, and suddenly you find something's enabled which you didn't realize. But it's also about configuration of workspaces. Another not easy, but relatively straightforward process is to go through and do an audit of every workspace and define 4 things. What is the purpose of this workspace? What is its reason for existing? Who is the owner of this? Who is accountable for the accuracy, functionality, and trust of that workspace? That is not all one person, the CDAO or the head of Power BI. That needs to be delegated to that owner. What data can it contain? That could be what data sources, but also what PII data. Can it contain bank details, sensitive information, customer information, things like this? And who is the target audience? You may have a couple of workspaces for finance, or you may have a different workspace for the CFO and the senior finance team than your bookkeepers. So the audience is very important because collectively, these determine how you should manage and how you should secure that workspace. But also you'll probably find that loads of your workspaces have identical sets of purpose, owner, data, and audience, in which case combine them and shrink your workspace sprawl. Turn off the ability for users to create workspaces. Make sure that they have to define these 4 criteria and then submit it for approval, and then you can create a workspace with this. And then You may be able to go back and say, no, use an existing workspace rather than creating a new one. Simplifies management. And then the final aspect of this is principle of least privilege. 20% of information security breaches are caused by internal staff being over permissioned. The fix to that is principle of least privilege. Review what permissions people have got, review with the audit log of what they are doing, reconcile the two together on a regular basis to understand where people are over permissioned. They have permission they're not using. Unfortunately, this is incredibly hard to do in Power BI. And so that's where you may want to look at an external tool like Power BI Sentinel that can help automate that side of it. But it is still very important to do that, especially with ISO and SOC 2 compliance. Let's look at resilience, audit logs. Now, audit logs are also important for the previous screen, monitoring what's going on that side of it. But critically, when something goes wrong, you need to know who created, deleted, edited, shared, or exported something. And that comes from the audit log. Within Power BI, you can see the consumption audit log for 30 days, who has consumed report, but not who's deleted, edited, shared, exported, things like that, turned things on, deployed to Git, things like that. So export the audit log and keep it locally. Microsoft store 30 days. You need to store a much longer history. That underpins most of monitoring and management of your estate. Rollback and change tracking. When something does go wrong, when someone deletes something or makes a breaking change, how do you have a rollback plan? How do you know from the audit log who did it, but change tracking, what they did, and do you have an ability to roll back? For your central core developers, get them to use Git source control. PBIP project files with Power BI Desktop integrated to Git works really, really well. The challenge is your end users, Mary in stock or Dave in finance, they're not going to be using Git. So what's your plan for monitoring their activity and helping support them when something goes wrong for a self-service or departmental report? And then look at single points of failure. Personal workspaces and personal gateways are two really critical areas here. If I create a report in my personal workspace, or I deploy a report in a shared workspace but use a personal gateway, if I leave, that report's either gone forever or it'll stop working because that gateway no longer exists. You only know that's going to happen when it fails. And this, again, undermines confidence in your Power BI environment. So identify those, identify any critical single points of failure and resolve them before they go wrong. And the final piece of the puzzle here is financial stewardship, FinOps. Monitor your licenses. Who's using Pro and PPU licenses? Who's got an E5 when they only need an E3, for example? Usually we see between 20 and 30% of licenses not being used. So instant cost saving, plus capacity management of, do you need all of your fabric capacity? Can you shrink it down? Can you scale up or down during the day or week as needed? Can you optimize the orchestration of your fabric workload and Power BI workloads to even out the workload to have a smaller capacity? And that comes down to monitoring. And then, of course, resource optimization. Allow your developers to develop. You don't want your devs spending all their time documenting, supporting, investigating. Allow them to develop. And then underpinning all of this is estate reduction. If you can remove 40% of your reports, which most organizations do have about 40% of their estate that is not being used, that's 40% less to monitor, 40% less capacity we're using to refresh, things like that. So now we know what we want to do. We need to look at the path to get there in terms of our governance maturity evolution. And we all have the same journey. We start out with complete denial. We haven't got to worry about this because it's a Microsoft problem, it's Power BI, it's software as a service, it's Fabric, it's all taken care of. It is not. And when something goes wrong, you move rapidly into the reactive phase of trying to figure out how we can find out what's happened. Spreadsheets everywhere, try and figure things out. At that point, it's pretty much too late. So that event forces you to move into a manual phase of developing some internal scripts and admin reports and processes that you start doing manually to try and get a handle on this. The challenge with that is it takes resource. And the one thing we all have lack of is resource. And so moving to an automated phase where you have automated processes and tooling, again, either a buy or a build approach that could just handle it for you, takes away that burden. Where you really want to get to is the prescriptive side, where we're using logic-based recommendations and AI-generated recommendations to actually recommend changes. For example, principle of least privilege. The automated approach may get your audit logs and may get your permissions, but actually there's a lot of manual work to figure out how to turn that into a recommendation of who should be downgraded. The prescriptive side automates that side for you. So that's the gold standard, but figure out where you want to get to on this journey. I'm going to show you one more slide from Power BI Sentinel, which shows you our one of the front end of one of our reports, our Power BI report, which is our governance report, which shows you a lot of these key high-level metrics aligned to confidentiality, integrity, availability for SOC 2 and ISO. And behind each one of these is some information and recommendations and proactive suggestions on how to fix some of these things. So if you want to see more of that, then please let me know. I'd be happy to share more detail. If you have any questions, again, please do put them in the chat. I'll get to those in a couple of seconds. A very quick case study for one of our customers, high street retailer, 1,000 stores. We were able to go through and remove over 600 permissions from their workspaces, downgrade 72 different workspaces, remove a fifth of their estate that wasn't being used, fix a couple of dozen reports that were failing all the time and undermining confidence. Between a half and a third of all of their licenses were not being used. Save a lot of money with that. Yes, these slides will be available after the session. Annabelle's going to get those sent out to you straight after the session, so do watch out for those. And then, yeah, one of the big areas is risk. We found they had over 7,000 reports being exported in the last quarter. There was a whole handful of users that were every day creating a report and exporting it to Excel. Now, once they're exported, you have no control over security, visibility. There's a massive business risk there. So this drove not only reducing the export privileges, but also training in security. And of course, their documentation is now fully automated. A couple of our customers here. Great to see Rick on the call from Ashley, who's one of our long-time customers. So great to see you again, Rick. But I want to leave you with a couple of takeaways, actions. Conduct a governance maturity assessment. Where are you on that governance line and where do you want to be? What do you have and what don't you have and where is your risk? If you can, align that to SOC 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, DORA, etc., whatever is relevant for your industry. Include a risk and accountability review. When something goes wrong, who is responsible for that? Who is going to take ownership of resolving these issues and putting in this plan in your estate? And then there's always some quick wins. Capture the audit logs. Make sure they're stored somewhere long term. Make sure your core central developers are using source control. Use enter group permissions, and then go through every workspace and define purpose, owner, data, audience for every workspace. Once you've got those, then define your path to that automated or prescriptive governance state. So I'm hoping that was of some use. Let me bring up the chat and see if there are any questions. Yes, as I mentioned, the slide deck will be sent out straight afterwards. If you have any questions, if we don't cover them on this session, my email address is on the screen. Please do feel free to email me about any aspect of Fabric, Power BI, ML, governance, adoption of data, etc. Always happy to chat. Yeah, powerbaisentinel.com, purplefrogsystems.com for that side of it. A very big thank you to you all for spending half an hour of your day on this session. Hope it's been of use.